So about a decade ago, I switched from a Windows computer to a Mac computer. And somewhere in that transition, I had built up a completely incorrect mental model about the keyboard event modifiers and the fact that the meta key within the keyboard event object was actually a generic concept that worked across operating systems. This is a completely wrong assumption. I don't know where I came up with it, but the reality is that the modifiers, which would be command on a macOS and control on pretty much every other operating system, have to be handled specifically within your JavaScript in order to create cross-operating system compatible key event bindings. So to explore this quickly, I have two little tiles here, one that represents the key that I clicked and one that represents whether or not that key event is considered modified on the current operating system. And I'm on my Mac OS, and you can see that as I type just regular lowercase letters here, none of them are modified. And if I hit the control key, you can see that the control key is not considered modified. And if I maintain the control key down and I type other letters, you can see that those are not considered modified as well. Now, if I hit the meta key or the command key on my keyboard, you can see that the meta key is considered modified. And now as I continue to type, we can see that these letters are also being modified while the command key is being depressed. Now, because this is going to be different on Windows, we have to manage all of this stuff dynamically. So let's look at the code. So the first thing that we do is when this page is bootstrapping or booting up, we're going to build an OS modifier object that we can then use to later on inspect the keyboard event bindings and also to output this to the page. So there's going to be places not only where we need to bind to keyboard events, but also to represent keyboard events to the user in a way that is cross operating system compatible. So if we jump down to the build OS modifier, what you can see is we're going to return two objects, one for when we're on a Mac-ish, so a Mac-related operating system, and one for everything else. On the Mac-ish operating systems, our modifier key, that is the property that we're going to use when inspecting the event object, is going to be the meta key. And everywhere else, it's going to be the control key. So you'll see later that we're going to use the .modifier property to inspect the event object. Now, in our demo, the next thing that we do after we build up our OS modifier is we bind to the key down event on the window. So that's why we're intercepting all of the key down events. And inside of our handler here, you can see that we're going to look inside that modifier node and update the text content. That is the tile right here. So we're updating this with a yes or no value. And we're going to do that by inspecting the event object using that abstraction, that OS modifier abstraction with the modifier. So on the Mac OS, that is again going to be the, let's see, can I get these all on the same screen? Yeah. So on the Mac OS, this modifier key is going to be that meta key property of the event. And on non-Mac related operating systems, that modifier is going to be the control key of the event. So now we can use this OS modifier abstraction to bind modified key events across operating systems. And we're also providing human-friendly concepts about which modifier we're talking about, which is how we're getting, again, this value here, which if we just look in the code quickly, you can see that that is this OS modifier code element, which we are getting here. This is the OS modifier node, and we're grabbing the text content and we're assigning it to the long property on that OS modifier. And that is, again, going to be on Mac OS related, command, and on everything else, control. So this is just a note to self mostly because I had this sort of embarrassing and completely incorrect assumption that I somehow created for myself years ago, and now just trying to correct that. So yeah, learning stuff every day, learning our mistakes.